Okay, are we good? Okay, so I've been a 2A only for the past 3 years. I've been debating for 5 years. When I started, I was a 2N, and the reason for that was just because I thought that the 2Ns were the ones who had to carry the team and do more work, and were the ones who won the round, while being a 2A was way easier. That was my general perception going in JV year, and when I started varsity, it kind of seemed true, because Aiden and I just switched right before a tournament one time, and we did way, way better. Just so much better when I was a 2A. But what I figured out after that was that being a 2A, a lot of people rely way too much on the crutches that the position gives you. And what I mean by that is that I think that AF teams should win way more than they do currently. The reason for that is that the AF structural advantages, the things that people just blow off all the time, that the AF has the first and last speeches, are actually huge important factors for every debate. The AF should control the debate, and by the end of the round, they have the controlling narrative. That's a brutal skill. AF teams should win almost every time, especially in these kind of topics. But a lot of times it doesn't happen. And in my opinion, a reason of it is that a lot of 2As aren't introspective enough about the advantage that they have. And so overall, being AF is a combination of 3 skills in my opinion. It's a combination of tech, research, and persuasion. And this applies for everybody. But too many teams get locked down to one corner. For example, there's a general view that like a school like MBA last year was only tech and research. Like Atticus and Maya's AF, Settler Cyborgs, did nothing. It was just all smoke and mirrors and tricks. And that's all we had every round. And having 2 of the 3 was enough to win a lot of rounds, but we lost a lot of rounds because we didn't have that third type of research. And so if you compare that to a school like, let's say, Woodward this year, who has extremely good research, very high persuasion, and this year they have far more tech than last year. They learn how to balance out all those skills to be a very, very effective team. Far more threatening than they were before last year, because now they're able to cover the lack of tech. And so my big guide for all 2As is to balance out your skill set and adapt to it. 1As have the exact same triangle, but the 1AR only needs 2 of these 3 things. It just needs tech and the 1AC's research, and that's it. A lot of teams rely too much on that 1AC research. Like I can think of rounds when Carrollton would just point to a card, and that's it, instead of elaborating what the card said. And so more this year, I see them developing that kind of tech. What NBA teams have started more recently is having both the research, tech, and persuasion, and combining those to be a lot better. I like that a lot. And so generally, what every 2A needs to do is figure out what type of AF they like. A lot of times people just pick AFs because it's what's given to them by the team. But I think 2A should have a reason why they picked all types of AFs. I figured out, I think, 5 types of AFs that I think are the main types generally. The first is just the true big stick AF. On this topic, it's just high-skilled immigration, an AF that has core advantages inherent to what it is. Last year, it could have been something like Title I with an econ scenario. The year before that, it was something like the Taiwan AF, based off of a big impact. All these AFs are extremely strong because they have an extreme amount of literature behind them defending it. They're big and they're easy to defend. Easy to persuade judges as well. The problem with many of these AFs is that they have an equal amount of neg research as well. They are debatable issues. They have things that have counters against them and inherent setbacks by design because of the scope of them. These types of AFs are very, very good for beginner debaters because they're easier to understand and rely on truth claims. That's why I think that every novice or JV team normally should read an AF like HSI because it teaches them the core skills of debate and how to develop the tech that's key for trickier types of AFs. Though big stick AFs do have their weaknesses also over time because of those types of neg research that teams develop as well. That's the reason why teams with big stick AFs tend to try to make them smaller. They want a no link out of dissets. Teams take the HSI AF and they make it just an AI AF because they don't want to link to econ. Things like that. That general trend eventually evolved into the second type of AF, tricky big stick AFs. This year, there's only like one team who does it. It's just GBN with their weird nurses AF and their like weird super babies AF. But this was a skill that Jablonski had better than anybody else. The tricky big stick AFs, we had about like 6 of them by the end of the TOC, and they were so strategic. They rely on, instead of inherent advantages to the AF, they rely on answers to the best debate arguments. For example, last year Jablonski had a FARA AF that was based off of Chinese Confucian schools coming to the US. And the key thing about them is that unlike the big stick AF that has people writing against them, nobody writes in the same amount of literature controversy, which creates some advantages. it means that they don't have those inherent types of dissets, and that pushes teams to have to go for counterplans against them. And that's why these types of AF, tricky big stick AFs, also usually have a perception advantage. Something about the process of the plan being done, not just the inherent advantages of them. That makes them very, very strategic, because if counterplans can't access that process, they'll always have a lot of setbacks to them as well. The third type of AF, which is quite popular recently, is soft left AFs. And I think that teams have been messing up soft left AFs a lot. We're kind of at fault for this too. It's just like a small advantage and then a ton of framing cards that aren't actually that strategic. And so a team will rely on one truth claim and then try to ride that truth claim throughout the whole round. I think it's a very strategic type of AF. One, because it's very easy to be persuasive on it. And two, it no links out of a lot of offense. And instead of relying on contrived debate arguments like, a lot of the internal links to nuclear war, it relies on truer claims like the impact of exclusions have on immigrants. The problem with soft left AFs is that they're very easily solved by counterplans. And so the way that that's been trying to combat is by weird framing advantages that try to zero out the risk of dissets. And I don't think they've been that good. A reason why I like our Asylum AF this year is that it was designed to beat counterplans. It had two advantages instead of just one. And it's designed around that type of strategy and persuasion still. The fourth type of AF is hard left AFs. These are quite rare. They're AFs that have plans, but are very, very radical, but aren't based off of nuclear war impacts. Last year, Atticus and I read an AF that gave back the land. This year, Bradford and Atticus read an AF that opens the borders. For the past couple of years, we've been the only team that reads them, but I like these AFs a lot. They're really fun. They're really interesting to read. They're based off of huge sweeping claims and can be very tricky. Last AF for KFs, I would discourage almost everybody here from reading KFs, just in my genuine opinion, just because we don't really need KFs to have the asymmetrical research advantage. I mean, KFs usually are read just so you can skirt out of offense, and there's way better ways to do that. And from personal experience, KFs are very boring very quickly because you hit framework every single round. So my general advice is once you pick one of these types of AFs, you have to research for strategy, not just for the sake of researching what this AF is. That's really critical. When Rankin went into this Asylum AF, his first thought was not what's the truest part of this AF, but what part of this AF can we make a very clear second advantage. And that's very important. People spend too much time researching the literature without a targeted lens, and that's extremely important. Every debater should go in with an idea of what they want that AF to be. I'll go through some examples. With a true big stick AF, let's say the EB5 AF, a lot of teams just look up EB5s and investors. That's not smart. If you have 3 reasons why EB5 investors should come to the US, those are all solved by the same counterplan. Instead, you need distinct reasons why those EB5 investors have disparate impacts. For example, you can have one advantage based off their econ impact. Another one can be based off of the way that they send money back through trade ties. I think Chris Eckert cut a Chinese FDI advantage based off of that. That's far more strategic because it isn't solved by all the same counterplans. A third advantage could be based off of the actual process of the plan being implemented. That's far better strategically than those 3 scenarios. Again, for the soft left AFs, like Rankin strategy of actually having an advantage that isn't solved by counterplans, far better. Okay, I think that's enough about picking an AF. And so a lot of people here don't need to do that now, but this is for the future. When y'all are in varsity, you'll have to pick an AF, and it's hard to do. Okay, blocks. The first thing that people try to figure out when they get an AF area that they want is the 1AC. That's important. The 1AC is carefully constructed. I've heard it said before that the 1AC should be like a shrine. It's something that you rever in its perfection of all the cards. Everything should be highlighted exactly the way that you want. It should have all the internal links that you want. It should be precisely yours and nobody's else. I think a problem in debate that I see is that people take 1ACs instead of making it their own. Everybody should have their own highlighting for the AF, and everybody should have their own scenarios that they like more, for a reason. People should be able to understand their AF better than anybody else. So you should pick the evidence in the 1AC very precisely. You guys should fill gaps in the strategy of the 1AC, and you should do your own highlighting. A strategy that Aiden and I do, which I think is pretty effective, is that I highlight the 1AC in my broad lens. I highlight everything that I think is interesting and important for the AF. The problem is that there's way too much stuff there. It'll be way too highlighted. And so then Aiden goes back and then guts that highlighting and shortens it a lot more. And I think that's a usually effective strategy for 2 reasons. One, it makes both partners understand the AF. Every partner, in my opinion, should read through the whole 1AC, obviously, but they should also read through the 1AC and take notes on it. That's something that I've done with every app that I've had. I go through each card and I take notes about why these cards are strategic and why we're reading them. If they're not strategic, take them out of your 1AC or highlight them down so they are strategic. That's a very, very important skill. So 2AC blocks, here's a general idea behind it. The organization that I have normally is case first, then add-ons, then answers to turns, then answers to topicality, your theory arguments, counter plans, and then dissets. And I have a separate file for case. I brought an example of Jablonski's FARA AF and Jablonski's HIA's AF because I just copied the organization strategy behind it. I think it's quite good. It starts out with things that he needs to do, then case defense. I personally would have a case overview here just because I like overviews, but those are better for soft left AFs than they are for big stick AFs. Teams with big impacts should be able to do the overview on the line by line. That's just a technical thing. Then he has answers to turns. See, a lot of turns in here also. Then topicality. Each of these have certain subheaders, and then 2AC dash the argument dash the specific author. I really like this organization, so I copied it in all my areas. Then it has counterplans and dissets. And he actually puts theory at the bottom, but I like it better at the counterplan. So that's the general one. Finally is 1AR blocks. And usually the 1A usually for me, the 1A has done them, but I think that the 2A probably should be the one who does it. That's just been me putting a little bit of responsibility on Aiden. But what all 1AR blocks just need is a case overview so that you don't have to do that in the round. T, because every single T round is the exact same, pretty much. And then answers to the most popular strategies. Like, you just want a general answer, the skeleton of what teams are going to go for against you. Every team should know that going into the round, what the most threatening strategy against the AF is. Okay, pairing comes out. I like Aiden's format here. You first can go through all the different parts of the round. So when the pairing immediately comes out, let's just assume here that your 2AC blocks aren't that good, because that's a better scenario than your 2AC blocks being perfect. In an ideal scenario, you should be ready to debate the second the pairing comes out. That's what AF teams should want. But let's just act like you don't actually have a complete 1AC made. There's two scenarios here. The first is hitting a predictable team, and the other is hitting an unpredictable team. I prep these very differently. If against a team who's the usual suspects, teams that hit all the time, teams that have clear wikis, and teams that we've hit before, I use what I call the delete method, and I compare that to surprise teams, the add method. And these are a little bit distinct. Against the usual suspects, I make something that I just call a 2AC prep doc. And so here's my prep doc against Greenhill EG. I looked at everything on their wiki from before, everything that they read against Bradford, and everything that they read against us. And I just made a compiled doc. And the reason why I did this is that under each of these headers, unlike my 2AC blocks, I specialized them to their offense, and I took out answers when they weren't needed. I made them more streamlined, knowing what they're going to go for. And so then against all their offense, I had more specific answers. And when the round came, literally, my speech 2ACs right here, it's almost identical, and I just deleted things that weren't in the doc. Made it extremely, extremely easy. Last year on the AF, I almost exclusively used this method of making a 2AC prep doc and deleting stuff. And for the whole first semester, I think I took prep like twice because of it. And I didn't need to take prep because a lot of the time before the round, I would have my whole 2AC already written, and during the 1NC, it'd be far easier to prep. The other way is just the add method. And so here's a little bit of technology that I can learn right now. The first one is tildes. I think everybody should be using them, and nobody does, and I don't use them enough. All it does is that anybody with the verbatim, I'm not sure how it works on Mac, is that verbatim has an automatic function. When you click the tilde button, it creates a speech doc. I can probably show it right now. You just press tilde. It says create. It's already sending it to my current speech doc. So let me just delete that. This is a generic speech doc. If you just go to any of the headers, it copies everything from that header down. So if I press this advantage one, it goes from everything on that advantage subheader to the framing page. And when I press the tilde button, without switching over to the page, it automatically copies in the advantage, which is super sick. You can use it everywhere. So usually against these surprise teams, like teams I'm not ready for, I'll just scroll down. If I hit wages, just press wages, and that's it. Way easier than having to scroll down and change it after that. If there's sometimes answers that I need specifically, I'll just copy down from the subheader, like you see this answer, and I'll just click one of them and copy that in instead. So TOTA, very, very useful. Another one is shortcuts. This is one that I found out under camp that I thought was pretty cool. Not many people use it. This one that I have, if I type out the word condo and then I press enter, it copies in conditionality, which is pretty dope. You can actually use this for a lot of stuff. The way that you do that is it's insert and then, I don't remember which one of these it is. I think it's this one. No. Oh, it's this one. It's this one. You see quick parts right here? Yeah, everybody should see that. Quick parts, if you highlight in one of your box and then you do auto text, it has certain headers they can do just from typing in words, and it copies in automatically, which I think is super cool. I haven't explored it enough, but you can be way faster at that. The last one is like Harrington's sneaky method of deleting all analytics with a press of a button. I have no idea how he does it, but it's really, really OP in my opinion. You have to make like a new font and then have a macro to do it. I don't understand it, but my opinion, all 2As should delete analytics, even though Austin disagrees with it. Personally, it's a couple reasons. One is that people steal your stuff. Two is that people will prep out your stuff word for word, which is really, really bad if they have all of your answers. And three, I think it kind of looks scrubby. That's just my personal opinion, though. Sorry, Austin. Mr. Yorko. But Mr. Yorko. Okay, 1AC. This is less about the actual reading the 1AC, but the prep for it. I think people need to adapt more with their 1ACs. Something that Aiden and I did this year compared to last year is that we have like 10 versions of the 1AC that we can change a little bit. We have 3 different second advantages, and then we have very, very different framing pages. And what we do is that based off of the judge, we completely change around the framing page. So if it's a judge who hates probability first and really likes util bad, let's say, you get rid of the probability first and you have more util bad cards. You should be willing to adapt to the judge, read different AFs in front of them so they can be put in the best spots possible. If you're hitting a team who only goes for the K, obviously have a 1AC that has K answers instead of dishead answers. If you're hitting a team who has both, have a combination version of the 1AC that's able to answer both as well. Obviously, it seems pretty intuitive, but I've seen a lot of teams just have 1ACs that aren't applicable at all to the 1NC. That's a bad scenario you want to be in. You want the 1AC, almost all of it, to be very threatening for the 1NC, that they have to answer as much as possible. This is easier to do with big sick AFs. A lot of times if you have 15 impacts, you can exploit it when the 1N drops impacts. But with the soft left AF, it's a lot harder to do, and that's why you want your framing cards to be distinct and have different warrants that are hard to answer. They sound dumb, but if a team drops counterforcing, it can automatically lose in the round if they just go for a disset. Have extra cards ready. That's a thing for 2As. A lot of time the 1A may be faster than before, or the 1A can have these cards up as well. Just have things that you're ready to read. A lot of times we just send out a bigger 1AC than we expect, just in case. That's just a stylistic thing. Cross-ex the 1AC. Follow all of Aiden's tips from the other speech. This is all the exact same. When you're AF, you want to answer things slowly and authoritatively. You want to convey as much as possible to the judge while not giving away your hand to your opponent. Aiden did that quite well. One of the best times that I've seen it was with Meacham and Rankin at the Southern Bell. Rankin just answered every 1AC cross-ex question with extreme amounts of legal knowledge that kind of avoided what they're asking. So you go into like the history of Chevron deference, you go to the history of different legal doctrines, and explain in very important parts of the judge of the AF to the judge, while not really giving the neg what they wanted to answer. You want to do that without looking like you're avoiding questions. Aiden said that quite well. Okay, 1NC. A little bit of a controversial opinion here, but clicking through the 1NC, I don't know. I mean, it's a little bit sketchy, but Aiden and I have done it. I'm sorry. Yeah, sure. And so what we actually do with this, I think this is something that we do quite well, is that we look through all of their off case, and then we say, do we not have answers to any of this? And a lot of times, I don't do this. Like, I see topicality, and I want to get my T answers. But instead, what we do is that we see all of their possible offense, we see what we need answers to, and then we divvy up labor. If there's something that we don't have an answer to, Aiden and I will usually divide it up. Like, I'll give Aiden to find impact D, or I'll ask Aiden to write out a block even, if it's something that I don't know about enough. And there's a lot of off case, and I don't have the time to read through it. That divvying up is very important, because a lot of times you can just get lost in prepping out your 2AC with losing sight of the broader picture of what they're going to go for or what you don't have answers to, which kind of screws you over later. Flowing, another one. It's hard to flow the 1 and C and prep your 2AC at the same time. This is a very, very hard skill to develop, but you have to be very attuned to when they read things like A-spec on the bottom of topicality, or when they flip pages and they may read an off case that's just completely analytically and they took it out. Those are very, very important skills, and if you don't flow the 1 and C, you're going to lose the round automatically if you aren't able to listen for that. But I almost never flow 1 and Cs. But what I do is that I listen to it very closely, and Aiden also listens to it and makes sure if they say something tricky that way. But neither of us actually flow the 1 and C. A little bit of a controversial opinion. I think for younger debaters, it's better not to follow that and flow more instead of less. Biggest thing, efficiency over all else in your prepping. You want to make sure that you're prepping so you have everything that you need to answer first. Very important. Don't prep out needless stuff. If you can beat a disad just on uniqueness and link, but you also want impact D, that impact D is important, but it comes after you have answers to their other disads. General thing. Listen closely, that was before. End of T, flipping pages. Always flow case. Whenever they move to case, I immediately go back to my page because most teams have analytics snuck in on case, and they're very selective at the cards they read because for some reason every team has a bias to reading as many off cases as possible and as little as the case cards as possible. And so I've seen so many 2As answer cards that weren't there. Just flow case and also do the line by line on case while they're spreading it. What I do, because I've practiced the app a lot, is shadow flow their case answers. That's quite important. When I hear the word circumvention, instead of writing them saying circumvention, I write no circumvention. And then I write 2 subpoints. Usually I'll say something like durable fiat and not our mechanism. I'll just write down those words, and then in the 2AC, I'll know enough about the app to explain that off the top of my head. That'd be more in the 2AC blocks. Okay. Actual 2AC prep, I tried to minimize it last year. This year I've kind of changed that. I'm more fine with taking more 2AC prep. I think that's an important thing. 2AC prep should be minimized, but shouldn't just try to be thrown off because you want to be as fast as possible. A lot of times, the 2AC will win or lose the round based off of how well you can answer something. And if it's a new argument, you want to make sure that you have a strategy to it, especially against higher level teams, because those new arguments are a lot of times their argument, the one they want to go for. And it's a skill to locate what they want to go for and overcover that in the 2AC, and your prep should reflect that idea also. You want to be able to have a lot of answers on those most scary off case so you don't have to improvise it. Splitting up work is what I said before. The 1A doesn't have that much to do during the 1 and C besides prep their 1AR. So a lot of times you can have them find impact D or find those other types of cards. You just don't want them sitting around doing nothing except for prepping for 2AC cross-X or whatever it is, the 2 and C. The actual order of the 2AC, always put case on top. General rule. I bet everybody here knows this already, but you want your offense first. Next, do topicality. It's what you can auto lose the round on. You want to answer it next. The next one is depending on the team for me. If I'm hitting a team who's going to go for the K, I put the K first. If I'm hitting for a team that's not going to go for the K, I put the K on bottom. That's a little bit controversial. The K right after T is pretty easy, and you should have your bare bones answer. Then counterplan, then disad. Makes logical sense. You want to have your partner also noting if you ever need any problems in your speech or if you need to answer something as well. Usually your partner can interrupt you at a good time. So to show you the actual mechanics of how these answers work, everybody should learn how to organize their blocks. This is the box I did for bioparanoia. I first have an advantage overview that has sub-pointed answers. And then I have answers to their offense. You want to structure all of these in a way that makes sense to you. And the biggest thing is that if your 2AC blocks are organized, you should be very quick at scrolling through and knowing where your stuff is. Extremely quick. So, topicality, everybody should know that goes we meet, counter-interpretation, answers to their offense. General structure works always. Theory, don't put it in the speech talks normally. And a trick that's pretty dirty, but everybody should do it, is notice when they're not flowing, have conditionality memorized, and say it then. I started using that type condo and then insert it, and I just do that whenever I notice they're not flowing, so I can get it word for word. Counterplans, the way I organize it for this app is that I have generic things that apply everywhere on the top to answer generic offense. Then I have specific answers. Everybody here should know already, but I'll just go through it. Against all counterplans, always say perm to both, perm to the counterplan. A lot of people forget to do it. You always want to say it. A lot of judges, if you don't say a perm, won't give you one later in the speech. I've seen people lose rounds on that before. Then your solvency deficit, then your cards. Also, always have links to the net benefit if it's a counterplan that does link to the net benefit. Actual disads, again, you want to have generic things that you can always apply. Then specifics. These 2AC blocks are harder to tilde through, and so what I do is that if I see like offense I don't need in this round, I don't include it, and I only include 3 or 4 of these like 5 answers to the basis set. That's good enough about specifics. I bet most people know this already. It's just very important to cover evenly, and the biggest way to do that is to prep efficiently. Okay. The actual block prep for a 2A is pretty hard, so I did that first because a lot of times it feels like you're doing nothing. Ways to do that, your first priority should be your partner's requests. You should ask them what they need. If they want you to type out an answer to something in Google Docs, do that first. That's your first priority. Nothing else matters as much as your 1AR. The next one is prepping out your cross-text questions, also very important. I like Aiden's advice of saving about 2 minutes to prep out your own questions. Never do it on the fly. Very easy to prep out questions. The third is finding cards. Usually if a partner asks for a card as well, you also have the 1NR to do that too, so that's a lower priority, but you should be able to traverse the Dropbox so you know where to find these cards. Fourth is prepping out the 2AR. This one's harder to do. They can prep out things like the case overview based off of their block strategy. If it's just a counterplan and a disad in the block, you know enough of what the 2NR will look like to prep out your generics. If it's just a K, you know how your overview needs to look differently. For example, Atticus, when he was a sophomore, had almost all of his 2AR written out by the 2AR. And the way that he did that was that during the block, he wouldn't listen, but he would just write down his whole 2AR. And then during the 1AR, he wouldn't listen and just write down the whole 2AR. And then during the 2NR, he would flow it and then change his 2AR based off of that. That's the worst scenario of this, but it's very effective. And it's a good advice of how you want to have parts of your 2AR already written out before. Not that much, though. Okay, 1AR advice. This is all from Aiden. He sent me out a pretty big email about this. A lot of hot takes in here. I don't know if I agree with them. The first hot take is don't flow the 1NC or the 2AC. I don't know about that one, but the way that he doesn't flow the 2AC is that he knows the 2AC blocks well enough, and most people don't know this. That's the important part. You should flow your 2ACs. This is a tip for mostly the higher varsity, is that a lot of times you don't need to flow the 2AC, but I would recommend everybody does it. This is Aiden's controversial takes. Very, very controversial takes. But his thing is that he also flows case always to use the partner's line by line in your own line by line. Always use your partner's wordings in the 1AR so it doesn't sound like it's new. And 2, whenever the partner goes off their flow and says something, always make sure you write that down. A lot of times those arguments just disappear because the partner only flows the speech doc, nothing else. Okay, Aiden's tips for blocking out the 1AR in the round. The first one is the guaranteed off case. For example, topicality. Most people should have topicality written out before the round, so it should be easy to copy and paste, but sometimes there's topicality they don't expect. During the 1NC and the 2AC and cross-sex, all those are moments where you can start writing out topicality answers before. Pretty easy. The next one is disads, starting out with impactee. So Aiden, as early as the 1NC, is already writing out extensions of impactee to the disad that they're probably going to go for, and the disad next after that, etc. And the things that you know are going to be there, already write them out. The third is counterplan top level, things like links to the net benefit, or an extension of a permutation against a guaranteed thing, or extension of your main solvency deficit arguments that apply no matter what. You can write those out during the 1NC against their main off. Finally, prep out 1NC questions during, this is just advice for 1ACs in general. You should prep out 1NC questions during the 1AC, or during the 1NC obviously. And then finally, Aiden with flowing the block. First, Aiden has a very important piece of advice here, is that not everything that they say is important. That's pretty true. People flow arguments that they don't need, and if you know that you're not going to go for something, it's more important to prep out things that you are going to go for if you're under time stress. This is also a little bit of a controversial opinion, but like if you know that they're right about uniqueness, and if you know that they're wrong about link, when they're on uniqueness and they're spending a lot of time reading cards, write out your extensions of the link. Far more important than extending your uniqueness when you're going to lose on it. Next, you should usually block out. Usually the block preface will just be the specifics of what they say. So if they, make a specific uniqueness argument, you should respond to it. Be ready to do all that type of intricate line by line. Finally, this is also very important. After the 2AC, if they take prep, make sure that you talk to your partner about what the 2AR strategy is against their main off case, specifically what the block's going to be for. I can't emphasize how critical enough this is. A lot of times, 2As only get to tell their 1As what they want to go for after the block has already happened. After all of that prep time, 16 minutes of the block, if you include the cross-ex, that's crazy. Only then does a 2A tell what their 1A wants to do when their 1A has been prepping the whole time is a bad model. Instead, during the 2 and C prep, you should have a discussion with your partner about what you want to do against their main off case, so that during the speech times, they know what you're going to go for, and they can have the ability to pick and choose on those most critical arguments. Super important. Also, after the block, still talk to your partner again, even if you talked to them before. Partner communication is so critical. This is maybe the second biggest tip to this whole speech right here. The second one will be use Google Docs. That's a general one. But the first is partner communication when you're on the F. You have to do it because if you have a mismatch in the wording or your ideas, judges will not like it at all. Very, very bad. And a lot of times you'll be stuck in positions as a 2A that you don't want to be, which is the worst spot to be in when you had all the tools to be in the right spot, if you just talk to your partner for 20 seconds. A tip that I learned from my lab, which I thought was pretty interesting, was that our lab leaders told us to write down the arguments that we want against their main offense before 2 and C cross-ex. During the 2 and C, you can write down what are the main strategies that you want the 1A to have, and then just give that to your partner during your 2 and C cross-ex so that they can read over that, which I thought was pretty good. Okay, 2AR, here's the 5 broad tips to all 2ARs. I sent this to Will Morgan a month ago. I thought it was really important. The first and biggest is storytelling. Every 2AR should have a story behind it, what you're going for and why. That's why every single 2AR that I have starts out with the line of the debate that we're going to win on. You want to accurately diagnose what you've won. If you've won because the counterplan links to net benefit and the AF outweighs, say that at the top. The judge will repeat that back to you at the end of the round, and it's an ethos moment to connect them. That way, even if you lack this kind of strategy in your line by line, the judge will remember what you're doing and why, because you said it at the top. But you want to continue the storytelling throughout the speech. The best 2ARs I've ever given are always ones where I have one idea of what I'm going for, and I know everything before the round. I know everything before the 2NR, and I have a clear story that I want to tell. I'm telling the judge that they're going to lose the round because of this, and here's 10 reasons why. All of them combine into one argument, and they all work together in synergy. Far, far better than just doing 2ARs based off of line by line and the flow directly, looking straight down the whole time, when I have a grand idea of what you're going to win on. The second one is identifying the key points of the debate, the issues that are going to decide the round. A lot of rounds are decided on small things, just like the link debate on politics. If you win this one argument, you win the round, say that to the judge and then win the argument. I can't emphasize how critical that is. You want to do the work on the most critical points of the debate that everything else hinges around. So many debates don't actually matter the parts that people think that they do. They spend a lot of time on framework on the K when they're just winning against the link. If they beat the link, they win the round. Something like that. There's a lot of scenarios with every single off case. If you win a link turn on the dissad, you beat the counterplan as well because it solves better than the counterplan. Things like that. A risk of a straight turn. There's key points of the round that matter far more than everything else, and you need to identify them. And you need to prioritize your 2AR around this. The third, in my opinion, is that you should have multiple routes to victory. I think of one round that we had last year. I can't remember the round specifically, but each judge voted on a different argument in a different way. They all decided it separately, and each of them said that they weren't convinced by what the other judge said, which is such a weird scenario to be in. And so you want to be able to have multiple routes so that you can claim the judge. Those can be included in the same story. You can tell a judge why the perm wins the round and your link defense wins the round at the same time. but you should have multiple routes to win around those critical points. The fourth is consolidation. You do not need everything in your 2AR. Even if your partner did it really well, you don't need everything in the 2AR. You need to pick and choose in order to beat the dissent effectively. So many times do I see debaters think that they're going to lose a round against a really high-level team, and so the way they compensate is that they try to do line by line against everything. But the problem is that they're getting out-teched by a more experienced debater. What they should have done was just pick and choose. If they just went on uniqueness instead of the link as well, they would have had time to do line by line and to answer all their warrants. This is a tip for how to beat higher level teams. I think almost every single high level neg team can lose the round after the 2NR if a smart 2A did the right choices. That's very critical. Neg teams think that they're infallible after the 2NR, but a lot of times a 2AR that wins just on one issue can win the whole round. And I've seen that happen before against us before, I think last year, when we just lose on one small argument that we didn't think was that important because the 2AR was able to blow it up and make it the one issue of the debate and frame everything else around that. A team that we shouldn't have lost to was now able to beat us just because they're able to consolidate the debate around an issue that they're confident on instead of everything. You don't need to spread yourself out. Very, very important. Fifth, this is advice from Will Morgan, was to twist the knife that he told me for the TSD last year, which I thought was a funny way of saying, point out what the 2NR did wrong, identify their key failures, and capitalize on them. If the 2NR did not answer theory enough, go in on it. You need to twist the knife and be brutal about when you're winning the round, when you're winning the round on an argument, and make it extremely clear to the judge. You want to be confident about the decisions that you make. If a 2AR lacks confidence, it loses that persuasive ability that's so key to it. Okay, general mechanics. The first one that I didn't write here, but I just remembered it, is the line between making new arguments and saying old things. A lot of judges think that every 2AR is trying to cheat as much as possible, and they wish to limit that because they think that you should be fair to the neg. Every 2AR should try to avoid that perception. You want to use the language of the 1AR in every one of the effective arguments that you make, but you can make new extrapolative warrants based off of that. A way that I often do that is that if Aiden makes an argument based off of the tag of a card, that's enough for many judges to say it was in this evidence. You can read that part. Or you can explain the interaction to new arguments that they had in the 2NR. If they made any type of new analysis, you should explain why your old analysis applies to it, which is not new. It's an extension of what you said. Just make sure not to sound new by using the same language that your 1A did. If you develop a grammar, then it makes it so much easier for the 2AR to be new, have new answers to things that you didn't have before while still answering that. I'll have a common scenario here. You completely dropped an argument. You have no answer to it. You're losing on uniqueness completely. There's ways to answer that. 1, you point out other parts of the debates that can win. 2, smart cross applications. A lot of judges reward that type of strategic thought. So if you point out how, let's say, one of their link cards contradicts their uniqueness card, even if that's newer, it's enough for judges to realize the interaction between the flows and warrant that. The third is that you should have a reason why that new 2AR analysis is good. A lot of people don't have that. Ethan Muse did this quite well against us one time when he just didn't have any answers to it, and he spent the whole 2AR just being like, Judge, I know this sounds new, but you have to vote them down because they never had the evidence or the warrants to back up their argument in the first place. Language like that, very, very critical. You can even give a generic example of this that I thought of camp last year was a team it was actually this year. A team in a lab round went for an argument that made no sense against us. It was topicality. This should have been the military resolution, not the immigration resolution. No sense at all. But I didn't actually answer it at all throughout the whole round. I didn't answer in the 2NR. And so I was just thinking, wait a second, we just lost this argument on an argument that doesn't make any sense at all. How'd that happen? We never had an answer to it. And none of the debaters, because it was actually in front of a lot of debaters, none of the debaters voted on that. None of the debaters voted on that because it's such a dumb argument, it doesn't make sense. You want to explain to the judge, instead of relying on the debaters, why dumb arguments that make no sense shouldn't win the round automatically. You can tip judges towards the direction of truth, and you don't want to make it so clear that you're giving away your hand. Some mechanics stuff, I said it before, say the round winning sentence at the top. very effective tool. Very effective tool. Have an ideal spread of the time. You want to know how much time you're going to spend on each part of the debate. And then when you're debating, look at your timer and see how far you're ahead or behind on your schedule. You don't have a schedule before, so you can allocate your time efficiently, and you don't get lost in the case line by line when it doesn't matter by the end of the round. You want to be able to know, I need 130 on the div stat to be able to do this efficiently. And the way that I structure my 2AR prep is that I subpoint my answers. And so sometimes I have to skip some subpoints to get to more important ones. You should be willing to sacrifice some of that stuff that you wrote out. But a lot of times, I think in younger debates, people have too little to say instead of too much. You want to reverse that. Instead of writing out whole sentences of what you're going to say, write out subpoints and be able to go off of them off the top of your head. Something that I do for 2AR prep is that I write out sentences when they are the most important things that will win the round. For example, I write out that round winning sentence. I write out what the perm looks like against a K team. But then on the line by line, I just write out the 3 words that I need and then explain them in the speech. Way more effective than writing out whole sentences and not having time to prep out any other answers. That way, instead of having too little to say, you'll have too much and you can reduce it during your speech. Tailor your speech to the judge. Every single AF team should read the judge paradigm. Neg team should do this as well, but I think it's incredibly important in AF because a lot of judges give away the type of biases that they have. If they hate certain arguments, don't go for them. Adapt to your judge. It's actually way easier than it seems. Judges make it very, very clear what they like and what they don't like, and follow that. Make your 2AR based on those arguments, and make your whole speeches based off of all those ideas. Finally, learn from your previous mistakes. Super big with the 2AR. If judges weren't convinced before on an argument, a lot of other judges won't be as well. Even if you thought it was a good argument going to the tournament, it's all about the way they can communicate it to the judge. And if you can't explain it, it's not a good 2AR argument. And it's not you want to be in the debate. A general tip that I've heard before is that you want, when you're AF, to construct the debate backwards. You want to have the 2AR ready before the round. Everything should be building up to that 2AR and designed a way the round you're going to win. In that way, if you view the round that way, you can win a lot more rounds because you can think about the strategy that you have by the end of the debate and then tailor all of your tech towards getting to that ultimate strategy. Yeah, I think that's it. Questions?
Can I just fire off like 3 rapid fire?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, first, do you flow the 1 and C if it's in a new off-case position that you've never seen?
Depends.
Make sure you repeat the question.
Oh, do you flow new off-case positions if it's something that you haven't seen before? If I can go through different examples, if it's a K, I don't flow it because I don't care about the K tags. I care about the substance of the card, and I read the card. I see if it's something that I've had before. Like, I didn't actually go over it that much, but I always have 3 things open. I have my 2AC blocks open, I have my 2AC K file open, and I have my impact D file open. Every time.
You have a separate impact D file?
Yeah, because I don't have all the impact D in my 2AC blocks because that'd be way too hard to organize. There's so much impact D. And so against new arguments like that, I don't flow it. I go to the area and then I answer it. If it's like a very, very tricky counterplan text, a lot of times I'll ask Aiden to figure it out over the next 5 minutes if I don't understand it. But otherwise, I write out the perms, I write out perm to the counterplan, and then I write out generic solvency deficits.
Okay.
You had 2 more questions?
Yeah. How much prep do you think it's okay to take before the 2AC?
Did you say how much prep is okay?
Yeah.
Oh, I think anywhere up to, let's say, 2 minutes and 30 seconds, but that's risking it.
That's risky.
Yeah, in my opinion, almost all 2A should aim for a minute of prep.
Okay.
0 at best.
This is just a technical question.
Mm-hmm.
Does tilde work if I highlight stuff and then it only switches over that?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, tilting, if you copy in the text and you just copy that, it automatically just sends that text to the block. That's what I did. Implicit line by line. That's a big one also. For 2AC line by line, I forgot to say this because it's just a technical thing. But when you do 2AC line by line against case positions, don't say they said econ collapse doesn't cause nuclear war. Say econ collapse does cause nuclear war because, and then explain it. But don't do it too much. Sometimes you need to have breaks and the judges get too lost otherwise. Ashwin? Ashwin asked what it meant to click through the 1 and C, and little bit sketchy. I mean, so yeah, we're gonna need to take this off of the recording. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, no. What I do is I actually read the headers. That's actually what I do normally because I don't want to click through it all. And so the sidebar has usually enough so I can figure out what the argument is.
To counter that, when you send out the one and see, you should tab over several times just to make sure that it's not the one in the header.
Yeah.
So they're looking at the navigation pane, they can't tell you're reading.
Yeah, that's some tricky one and see stuff if you didn't hear that. Yeah, in. Okay, 2AC line by line versus the K. This one's pretty important, so people should listen to this one. The way I structure my 2AC blocks is that I have a time for K line by line. I always have framework first, and then I have the perm, and usually I answer the link cards on that perm debate and make it sound like the perm is a better way to solve the link than they are. So if they say state sovereignty is always bad, I say the perm is better at challenging state sovereignty by using the state to challenge itself instead of completely vacating that field. Something like that. And then I usually say, their author says this, they're wrong. And then I explain the reasons why. If it's a link card, I say, 1, it's not specific to the AF. 2, it's incredibly inevitable. It's something that's ingrained in society, so it's better to retool those types of societal systems in order to further whatever their alt is. 3, their alternative can't solve the link. Pretty logical argument normally. If the link is just about the state generally, and they try to make the alt a pick, they link to their link as well, if they use the same type of increasing immigration. That's very important. So against every one of those link arguments, you can always just say, nope, not our F, it's very inevitable, and the alt can't solve. Against other types of line by line, if it's an impact on a K, usually you don't have impact D to whatever the random arguments are. There's generic cards like the Chandler card that's pretty good about like liberal wars not being a thing, but instead you make the same type of arguments just rephrased differently. 1, this isn't the only way that the impact happens. There's other explanations for environmental collapse than the FemK. 2, the alt can't solve it. And then usually I do more line by line specific to their cards. On the alternative, I do that later. So after I do the perm, I go to the alt debate. And then I make all of the answers to the alt specific to their text. So if it's burn it down, you want to answer why burn it down is bad. If it is a capless overthrow, you want to do line by line based off of that. But if it's just analyze the system, you need radically different answers to burn it down. You want to say why analysis alone doesn't work. Well, you have to have forms of praxis. You want to be able to make it all specific to that. And so Aiden's question originally was just how you do the line by line, and this is more specific answers to that. And the way I usually do it is I just write out 3 of the generic answers, and I contextualize it either off the top of my head or if I have time. Other questions? Yeah.
What should be like the ratio for line by line and cards in 2AC?
Okay. The question was what's the ratio between line by line and cards? That question is more of a question of how you make your 2AC blocks. So I would say that your 2AC line by line on case itself is all line by line normally. Those 2AC overviews, I almost never use them. Instead, I use those overviews on the line by line. If you're reading a big stick AF, when they read impact D, that's when I extend my impact. Also critical is you always have to notice things that they drop. And so that's all the line by line. On the actual blocks themselves, answering specific arguments, usually enough of the analytics should already be in there. If there's ever a gap in your block, fill it. But the actual division should be made in your 2AC blocks. And usually, over time, you get more cards just because you do more research. And usually, judge likes cards better than analytics. And so, ideally, 2ACs against off case read a lot of cards because cards are usually more threatening than just flipping analytics. But you also make threatening analytics like perms. But you need to balance it, and it's different from the case debate to the off cases. Yeah, Ashwin? So Ashman's question for the microphone was against on 2AC blocks to disads, whether or not you divide them or not, or if you just have the whole 2AC block. My opinion, pretty strongly, is that on disads, it's very important that you have, there's some word for it, but you have divided blocks, so it answers each part of their arguments. Like my 2AC, the base disad, isn't just one thing. I have answers to all the different possible impact scenarios, different impact D cards, different internal link cards, and I pick and choose them during the 2AC. That's different from counterplans though. Most counterplans for me are very generic, and I just can copy and paste the block. For the rule of Landy Aff, usually people read 2 different counterplans and then combine them into one. And so I have 2 separate headers, and I just combine those into one answer instead. And so usually I think that the combining doesn't take that long, and the trade-off from just having one answer to the basis ad a lot higher.
And then the second question, if it's like a new dissad that's not politics, like how do you get lengthy to that or you see that?
Ashton's question is, how do you answer new diss ads? The first one is, if it wasn't put out at camp, it's probably bad. And the way that you point out bad arguments is similar to the way that you point out bad evidence from Aiden. You scan through it. What you can usually make are a couple of generic arguments. Like Aiden said in the last speech, one's reverse causality, whether or not their evidence is conclusive about that. The second is pointing out mismatches between their uniqueness and their link. A lot of times, diss ads rely on different arguments that don't actually relate to each other. The third is a lot of times their evidence, or just logically, there's answers to their arguments that are just true. Like, for example, let's say that somebody popped that protectionism dissad that Lincoln put out against I think the Carrollton Aff. That was just like, we would pull away from NAFTA. Just off the top of your head, you should just be able to make generic answers to it. 1, there's a bunch of other immigration issues. 2, Trump will do it inevitably, it doesn't matter. 3, the plan doesn't have any causal link to any of the change on trade policy because they're isolated. 4, trade policy is not the only issue that matters in overall economy. And then just find a generic impact card. You can just make those smart logical arguments at every one of their chains. Pretty easy to answer new dissabs. But a lot of the times, because I'm pretty lazy 2A, I just give it to Aiden. I'm just like, Aiden, answer this new dissad. I don't know what to do. And he just types out stuff.
Okay, but like what if it's not, like what if it's politics? So that's like, that's not politics.
The question is, what if it's politics is new? You should always have generic answers to politics. Thumpers always apply. Gut thing that you need to do is that if teams are breaking new politics dissads specifically against you, they may be tricky politics, like reverse politics or something. That's a whole different rabbit hole. But it can be a tricky style argument, and so you want to make sure that they're not trying to mislead you. We used to do that all the time, where we'd like tag our uniqueness and link cards to look like they went one way when they said the exact opposite of it. So teams would just only read cards for us. And you want to be able to call that out by reading their evidence, because their evidence is always going to be quite trash. Other questions? Okay. I can answer more any time.